As the late afternoon light cuts across my living room, my daughter says she has a new family now. Still, I press my palm flat on the table, steadying my breath instead of my voice. While the same light stretches along the floor, her words sink deeper than anger ever could. The same light touches the walls I built our life inside, counting every sacrifice I paid. That's when the light makes it clear she didn't just leave me, she disowned the legacy. Still, I stand in that light, deciding she'll keep the name and I'll keep everything else. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Helen stood in the living room, feeling the weight of Megan's words press down on her chest. I have a new family now. The phrase echoed in her ears. A cruel reminder of the daughter she had once known, now a stranger. Megan's voice had been cold, final, as though this was a decision made long ago. She stood by the door, arms crossed, offering no comfort, no warmth, just the stark reality of a woman who had chosen to cut ties. Helen struggled to breathe, her body rigid, her thoughts racing. She'd spent years building this life for them both, wealth, legacy, stability. Everything she'd worked for was supposed to mean something, to be passed down to Megan. But now, it seemed, it had all been tossed aside. Helen's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of disbelief and simmering anger. Megan? Helen's voice trembled, but she fought to keep it steady. You don't understand. This family, this legacy, it means something. You can't just walk away from all of it. But Megan only shrugged. Her eyes distant, disinterested. I don't need it anymore, Mom. I don't need you. Helen felt the sting of those words deep in her bones. She had known this day might come, but she hadn't been prepared for how much it would hurt. She had given everything for this family, for Megan, and now her daughter was turning her back on it all. You think this is about money? Helen's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of sacrifice. It's about the family we built. It's about your legacy, Megan. Your father. She stopped herself, biting back the words. There was no point in invoking Paul's memory now. Megan's face twisted in impatience. I don't need a legacy. I have my own life now. Her words were cutting, final. The air between them felt suffocating. Helen opened her mouth to say something more, but nothing came. There was nothing left to say. She had spent so much time trying to hold on, trying to make things right. But it was clear now. Megan had already decided. Megan turned toward the door, her back to Helen. I'm done here. She paused, glancing over her shoulder one last time. I'm starting over with my new family. Don't bother calling. Helen stood frozen, watching her daughter walk away, as if everything she had worked for, everything they had shared, meant nothing. When the door shut behind Megan, the silence in the house was deafening. Helen stared at the empty space where Megan had stood, her heart sinking. She had been abandoned by her daughter, by her past. It took a moment before she could breathe again. When she did, the clarity was immediate. Megan had severed their bond, but Helen would not let her take everything. She would make sure of that. Helen picked up her phone and dialed Clara. As the phone rang, she felt a sense of cold resolve settle in her chest. This would not stand. Megan would not walk away unscathed. The call connected. Clara, I need your help. Helen sat at her desk, the weight of the decision pressing down on her with every passing minute. The phone call with Clara had been brief, but it had been enough. Helen knew what she had to do now. Her fingers hovered over the keys, typing in the name of her lawyer, Richard Hayes. The screen glowed back at her in the dimly lit study, the stillness of the room amplifying the sense of finality. She hesitated for just a moment before pressing send, then immediately regretted it. It wasn't the first time she'd contacted him, but this felt different. This wasn't just a routine matter of updating her will for future contingencies. No, this was the act of severing a tie. It was not just her daughter she was cutting off, it was everything she had spent her life building. The phone rang, cutting through her thoughts. Richard's voice was steady, professional as always, but it couldn't mask the underlying tension that Helen now felt deep within her bones. "Helen, what can I help you with today?" he asked. "I need to update my will," she replied, her voice surprisingly calm. Richard's pause on the other end was telling. "Of course, Helen. But is this? How urgent is this? I want it done today." Another silence, then, "I see." Helen exhaled slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. "I've made my decision. Megan will no longer be part of the estate. I want to leave her the family name. Nothing more." The words hung in the air. Richard was quiet, likely processing what she had said. Megan, her only daughter, the woman she had invested her soul in. Helen was disinheriting her. The legacy she had fought so hard to preserve was being handed over to those who would honor it, not squander it. "Are you sure about this?" Richard asked. His voice softened slightly, as if searching for some sign that Helen might change her mind. "I'm sure," she said, her voice firmer than before. "I don't know when she stopped being my daughter, but she's made her choice, and now I'm making mine." The line was silent again, save for the faint sound of shuffling papers on Richard's end. "All right, I'll get the paperwork started. We can get everything drawn up by the end of the day." "Thank you," Helen whispered before hanging up. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat back in the chair, gazing out of the large window. The house that had once felt like a fortress now seemed hollow. Every room, every corner, every piece of furniture, a reminder of the love she had once believed was unshakable. But it was gone now, lost in the cold distance that Megan had created between them. David entered the room, his face drawn. "Mom?" He paused, glancing at the phone in her hand, knowing full well who it had been. "Are you sure about this?" Helen met his gaze, his concern palpable. She'd never wanted him to feel the burden of her decisions, but now there was no choice. The reality was sinking in for both of them. "I have to do this," she said, her voice strained. "She's made it clear that she doesn't want any part of us, any part of this family." David shook his head. I don't want to see you regret this, Mom. Once it's done, there's no going back." Helen pressed her lips together, willing her emotions to stay in check. "I won't regret it. I've spent my life building something. She's chosen to walk away from it all." David stared at her, his gaze full of conflict, but he finally nodded, albeit reluctantly. "If this is what you need, I support you." Later that evening, Helen met Emily at the small, quiet restaurant they frequented, an oasis of normalcy in an otherwise chaotic time. The dim lighting and soft murmur of conversation around them made it feel like a world away from the tension she was carrying. Emily, always the one to speak plainly, studied her closely. "You're sure, Helen?" Emily asked, her voice low but insistent. "I know you're hurt, but this, cutting her off entirely, you've always put family first." "I have," Helen said, swirling her wine glass, watching the deep red liquid catch the light. "But I've done everything I can. I can't keep offering her the world when she's turned her back on it." Emily nodded slowly. "I understand. She doesn't deserve this wealth if she's unwilling to honor it. But don't be surprised if it blows up in your face. She'll fight you on it." Helen met her gaze. Let her fight. Let her waste her energy. As the evening wore on, Helen could feel the weight of her decision sinking in. By the time she returned home, her new will had been drafted and signed. It was final. Megan would inherit only the family name, a hollow reminder of a legacy she had chosen to reject. Helen stared at the signed document, her fingers lingering on the edge of the paper. She couldn't help but wonder, was this the right decision? But there was no time for doubt now. Megan had made her choice. And now, Helen had made hers. Tomorrow, everything would change. Megan stared at the will, the words swimming before her eyes. I leave to my daughter, Megan Pierce, only the family name, nothing more. Her heart hammered in her chest as she reread the sentence, the weight of it sinking in. Only the family name, everything she had assumed she would inherit. Everything her mother had worked so hard for was being stripped away. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts as she picked up her phone, dialing her mother's number. The line rang, then went to voicemail. Mom, it's me. Call me back. We need to talk. Her voice shook, but the anger bubbling inside her made it hard to think clearly. She dialed again, then again, each call unanswered. Megan's fingers hovered over the screen, frustration mounting. How could she have been so blind? Her mother had been cold for months, but this was betrayal. She felt her sense of entitlement rise, a feeling she couldn't shake. Everything she had sacrificed, everything she had done to be part of this family had been for this, and now it was all taken away. She grabbed her laptop, typing furiously. She knew who to call, the family lawyer. Richard Hayes had been in charge of her father's estate, and she knew he'd have answers. She needed to challenge this will. There had to be a mistake. Megan's fingers trembled as she sent the email, outlining her desire to contest the will. She wasn't going to let her mother do this without a fight. Helen, on the other hand, had already moved on. She didn't need to check her phone. The silence from Megan's calls wasn't a shock. It was the result of Megan's choices. The girl had walked away from her, from everything. Helen wasn't about to let her back in now. She had made the decision to disinherit her, and there was no going back. That afternoon, Helen went about her day as usual. She attended a charity event, spoke to business partners, and focused on her projects. The world hadn't stopped for Megan's temper tantrum, and Helen wasn't about to let it. David called her in the evening, concern heavy in his voice. Mom, are you sure about this? Megan's not going to take this well. It could cause a rift we can't fix. Helen paused, her fingers tapping the edge of her wine glass. She had known this would come, but the reality still felt sharp. She made her choice, David. She left. She chose to turn her back on everything this family built. She'll understand the consequences. David's voice softened, hesitant. I don't want you to regret this. I won't, Helen said, the words final. It's done. As the call ended, Helen stared at her phone, the screen flashing with missed calls from Megan. Her heart didn't waver. The decision had been made. Megan had her name. That was all she would ever get, and somewhere deep inside, Helen felt the first stirrings of relief. The doorbell rang sharply, jolting Helen from her thoughts. She knew who it was before she even stood up. Megan had finally come, demanding an explanation for the will. Helen took a slow breath, steadying herself before walking to the door. She opened it to find Megan standing there, face flushed with anger, her fists clenched at her sides. Mom, Megan snapped, stepping forward without waiting for an invitation. You need to explain yourself. You can't just take everything from me. Helen didn't flinch. She'd expected this confrontation, and it wasn't the first time Megan had come demanding things. But this was different. Megan wasn't just angry, she was desperate, furious, and entitled. Come in, Helen said quietly. Stepping aside. There was no point in trying to avoid this any longer. Megan didn't wait to be asked twice. She walked in, her eyes burning with fury. I have a right to everything, she spat. This family, this legacy, it's mine. You can't just... I can, Helen interrupted calmly, closing the door behind her. You don't understand. This family, this legacy, it's not something you can take for granted. It's earned. Megan's face twisted. Earned? I've worked my whole life for this. I'm your daughter. I deserve it. Helen's eyes narrowed. You walked away. You chose to abandon us, everything we've built. Now you have the name, and that's all you're going to get. That's the consequence of your choice. Megan's anger flared, and she stepped closer, her voice rising. This isn't fair. I was supposed to inherit everything. This wealth. This life. You can't just... I can, Helen said, her voice unwavering. You don't get to decide how things work. You walked away, Megan. You chose a new life, a new family, and now you'll have to live with the consequences." David, who had been standing quietly in the hallway, watched the scene unfold. His eyes flickered between his mother and his sister. He could see the conflict in Megan, the raw emotion, but he also saw his mother's unshakable resolve. He was torn, caught in the middle of a battle he didn't want to be part of. Megan's face was twisted with disbelief. "How can you do this? After everything I've given up for you, for this family—" "Everything you've given up?" Helen repeated, her voice steady but with an edge of finality. "You gave up nothing. You chose a different path, Megan. You chose to walk away. You abandoned your family. I'm done trying to make you understand." Megan's chest heaved with frustration, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. But before she could speak again, Helen added quietly, "The family name is the only thing left for you. The rest belongs to those who choose to honor it." Megan stared at her, and for a moment there was a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, but it was quickly replaced with anger. Without another word, she turned and stormed out, her footsteps echoing through the house as she slammed the door behind her. Helen stood still, her heart heavy but resolute. She had made her choice, and there was no going back now. The days following Megan's departure from the house felt heavy, as if the very air around Helen had thickened with the weight of the decision she'd made. She had expected the fallout, but the reality of it was different, harder, colder. Yet there was no room for regret. Megan had severed the bond, and now Helen had to stand firm, no matter the cost. Megan wasted no time. Within days, her legal team filed a motion to contest the will, accusing Helen of acting out of malice, of being unfair and manipulative. The headlines echoed her sentiments, framing the entire situation as a mother's vengeful act. Megan's face appeared on TV, her voice full of emotion as she spoke of her years of sacrifice, her dismay over being treated as an afterthought. But Helen didn't flinch. She'd prepared herself for this. Clara, her trusted friend and lawyer, had already anticipated the move. Together, they had devised a plan to protect the legacy Helen had built from the ground up. The legal battle wasn't going to be quick, but it would be thorough. Helen would fight back, and she would win. The law firm had already begun working on the counterclaim. Every document, every word, every witness would be meticulously reviewed. Clara briefed her on the next steps as they sat in the sleek office overlooking the city. "We need to remain unemotional about this, Helen. This is about facts, not feelings. Megan's claims will be scrutinized. The court will see her actions, her abandonment of the family. We're ready." Helen nodded, her fingers drumming against the arm of her chair. She didn't care what the world thought of her. She was doing this for the legacy she had built, the one Megan had so carelessly discarded. "She's trying to rewrite history. I won't let her." As the legal preparations unfolded, Helen's life didn't stop. She continued with her work, her charity events, her business ventures. In fact, the more the public focused on Megan's legal drama, the more Helen flourished. Her name became synonymous with power and influence. People admired her strength, her ability to stand tall despite the personal attacks. David, meanwhile, tried his best to mediate. He called Helen frequently, urging her to at least consider reconciliation. He could see how much the rift hurt her, but he also understood the finality of Helen's decision. Still, he hoped that somehow there could be a way back for Megan. "Mom, you don't have to keep fighting like this," David said one evening as they sat across from each other in Helen's expansive dining room. The house felt emptier now, and he could see the toll it was taking on her. "Maybe you should just talk to her. Settle this." Helen set her wine glass down slowly, looking at David. "This isn't about talking anymore. It's about principles. It's about showing her that she can't walk away from everything and then come back demanding it all. She had her chance." David's gaze softened, but there was nothing more he could say. The decision had been made. He had never wanted to be in the middle of this, But here he was, forced to watch his family unravel. Megan's legal team continued to attack, but they found no footing. Every attempt to challenge Helen's will was blocked by technicalities. They argued that the will had been created under duress, that Helen had been emotionally compromised after Paul's death. But Clara had anticipated these arguments. The documents were airtight, every legal requirement met. Megan's case withered under the weight of cold, undeniable facts. Each day as the battle wore on, Helen felt a strange calm settling over her. There was peace in knowing that the legacy she had fought for was secure. She had made her choice, and it was the right one. The pain of losing Megan was sharp, but it was also final. There was nothing left to do but move forward. Helen looked out over the city one evening, her gaze drifting to the skyline. She had been right all along. Megan's desire to claim everything without earning it had been her downfall. Now, Helen could rest easy, knowing she had protected what mattered most. But as the months passed and the legal battle began to draw to a close, Helen couldn't shake the feeling that Megan was still out there somewhere, waiting for her next move. And somehow, Helen knew the story wasn't over yet. The ruling had come down swiftly. Megan had lost. Helen sat in her office. The room bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun, but the warmth didn't reach her. She stared at the legal document in front of her, the finality of it settling in. Megan would not inherit anything, except the family name, as she had chosen, and the world would know it. The decision was public now, and there was no turning back. Megan, of course, had reacted explosively. Her face had been plastered across every news outlet, her anger spilling over into every interview she gave. She accused Helen of heartlessness, of trying to erase her from the family history. "This is my birthright," Megan had screamed. "How could she do this to me?" The footage of her ranting made headlines, the public eating up the drama, the fight between mother and daughter unfolding like a soap opera. But Helen didn't flinch. She never had. The more the media painted her as the villain, the more the whispers of admiration came from her colleagues, from friends, from people who had watched her steady ascent to power. They saw something in her, a quiet, unshakable strength that made them respect her even more. Despite the fallout, Helen felt no remorse. It had been the right choice. Megan had left her no other option. And now, Helen could turn her focus to what truly mattered, the legacy she had spent her life building. With the public eye now on her, Helen made use of the spotlight, not for self-promotion, but for good. She threw herself into the charities she had long been passionate about, her name attached to causes that mattered: education, women's rights, mental health awareness. She used her influence to open doors for others, to give back to the community that had helped elevate her. The very foundation of her success was built on the shoulders of the people who had supported her, and now it was time to return the favor. David, on the other hand, seemed to breathe easier with the case behind them. He called her frequently, expressing relief that the worst was over. "At least it's done, Mom," he said one evening as they sat in her living room, the light from the fireplace flickering between them. "It's behind us." Helen nodded, but there was something in her that remained unsettled. David might have found peace in the finality of it all, but for Helen, it wasn't about the victory. It was about the loss of a daughter who had chosen a different path, one that had led her to this point. She didn't regret her decision, but the pain of it lingered deep inside. David noticed her silence. "You're still thinking about her, aren't you?" he asked gently. Helen looked at him, her face impassive. "There's nothing left to think about." But David wasn't so sure. He had seen the toll this had taken on his mother, even if she didn't acknowledge it. She was a fighter, always had been, but there was a difference between strength and resignation. He knew she had made her peace with the outcome, but the hurt remained, quiet, persistent. Outside, the world had moved on. Helen's name was once again a symbol of power and philanthropy. People admired her resilience, her unwavering commitment to what was right. They respected her strength in the face of personal betrayal. And then there was Megan. The anger never seemed to subside. Megan continued to battle, finding new ways to voice her frustration, to claim what she believed was hers. Her attempts to rebuild her life faltered, her resentment poisoning every new venture she tried. The family name, the one thing she'd been left with, wasn't enough to rebuild what had been lost. Megan wasn't done. Helen knew that. The battle may have been over, but the war, whether fought on the battlefield of law or emotion, was far from won. One day, as Helen walked into a new office for a meeting, she caught sight of an envelope left on her desk. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling as she read the few lines of text. It was a letter from Megan. The message was simple. "I'll never stop fighting for what's mine." Helen closed her eyes, the weight of those words sinking in. The silence between them was far from over. The legacy Helen had fought so hard to protect. It would be tested again. And this time, there was no telling what Megan would do next. Megan stood in the doorway, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. The fire from her earlier anger had been replaced with a quiet, almost fragile vulnerability. She had come to fix things, to heal the rift that had torn them apart, but Helen knew the truth. There was no going back. "Mom," Megan began, her voice soft, "I was wrong. I didn't understand what I was doing. Please, can't we start over? I want to fix this. I want us to be a family again." Helen stood, unmoving, the weight of the decision she had made still heavy in her chest. The years of sacrifice, the legacy she had built, it all led to this moment. She had fought for everything, and now Megan was asking for it all to be undone. "Megan," Helen said quietly, her voice steady, "the only thing left between us is the name, and that's all you'll ever have from me." Megan's face contorted with disbelief. "What? No, that's not—" Helen held up a hand, silencing her. "Don't. You made your choice when you walked away. You chose your new family. I didn't want this, but you left me no choice. Now you'll have to live with the consequences." Megan took a step forward, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could have everything. I thought I could start fresh and that maybe we could have it all." Helen shook her head, her eyes darkening. "You chose to abandon me, Megan. You turned your back on everything we built together, on your father's legacy. And now you want to come back and take it all?" Megan's chest heaved with emotion, the tears now spilling over. "I made a mistake, Mom. I see that now. But I never meant for us to be like this. I never meant to let go of you." Helen's heart twisted at the rawness of her daughter's pain, but she didn't soften. "You let go of me long before this, and now I'm letting go of you. The name is all I have left to give you." Megan stood frozen, her face crumpling as she realized the truth of her mother's words. There was nothing left, no inheritance, no family legacy, just the hollow reminder of the name she had once carried proudly. I understand," Megan whispered, her voice hollow with defeat. She turned slowly, her footsteps heavy as she walked toward the door. Helen didn't follow. She couldn't. As the door clicked shut behind Megan, silence filled the room. For a moment, Helen stood still, her emotions a whirlwind, but deep down she knew this was the right decision. Megan had chosen her path, and Helen had to protect what mattered most, her legacy, her future. David entered quietly, standing beside her, a silent witness to the end of it all. "Is it over now?" he asked softly. Helen nodded. "It's over." They stood together, the weight of the past settling around them. Helen had made the hard choice. Now it was time to move on. Helen stood at the podium, her gaze sweeping across the crowded conference hall. The bright lights above cast a soft glow on the faces before her, attentive, eager. She'd been speaking at these kinds of events for years, but today felt different. Today, she was not just a successful businesswoman, she was a woman who had survived betrayal, who had rebuilt her life from the ground up, and who was now standing tall for everyone who had ever been made to feel small. The audience hung on her every word as she recounted the hardships she had faced, the years of sacrifice, the unyielding dedication to her family, and the painful choice she had made to protect her legacy. The story of her decision to disinherit Megan had become part of her narrative, one she spoke about with a sense of finality, but also with a quiet pride. She had done what she needed to do. As Helen spoke, she could feel the weight of the name Pierce surrounding her, not as a burden, but as a symbol of resilience. It wasn't just a family name anymore. It was a representation of everything she had built, everything she had fought for. She saw the looks of admiration, the nods of understanding from the women in the audience. They saw her strength, her resolve, and that was what mattered. After the speech, she was surrounded by women, young entrepreneurs, executives, and students, each one eager to hear her advice, to learn from her experience. Helen listened, shared, and mentored. She didn't just give advice, she gave them her story, her strength, her example of what it meant to stand firm in the face of everything trying to tear you down. As the event ended, Helen stepped into the cool evening air, the hum of the bustling city around her. She smiled to herself, feeling the weight of the years lift just a little bit more. There was no room for regret anymore. She had built this empire, this life, and it was hers to keep. Back at the office, her assistant handed her a stack of papers. Business continued to thrive, and Helen was at the center of it all, leading with wisdom, with a quiet authority that commanded respect. She glanced through the reports, her mind already focused on the next steps. The work she had put in was paying off, and the world was noticing. She'd established a foundation, supporting women's causes, expanding into new markets, and empowering the next generation of leaders. It was more than just business now, it was a mission. But as she moved through the day, something shifted. Megan had faded from the public eye, her name barely a whisper in the media. The attempts to rebuild her life, new businesses, new alliances, had fallen flat. The world was moving on, and Megan, despite her fury, was left behind. There was no redemption for her, not after everything she had thrown away. Helen paused for a moment, looking out the window of her high-rise office. She reflected on the choices she had made. They had been difficult, no doubt. The weight of losing a child, of severing that bond, would never fully leave her. But she had grown, had become something stronger than she had ever imagined. The decisions she made in the heat of the moment had shaped her into the woman who stood here now. A woman who could stand alone and still stand proud. Her legacy was more than just wealth or success. It was about her ability to rise, to build something that would last, and to show others that they too could endure. The Pierce name was no longer just a reminder of family history. It was a testament to her strength and independence. It was a beacon for anyone who had ever been told they couldn't, a symbol that no matter what life took away, there was always something left to fight for. And as the day came to an end, as Helen stood looking out over the city she had helped build, she realized there was nothing left to fear. Megan's absence had only cleared the way for Helen to be exactly who she was meant to be, a leader, a creator, a force. For the first time in years, Helen felt truly free. But as she reached for her coat and prepared to leave, her phone buzzed. A name flashed across the screen, Megan. Helen stared at it for a long moment before placing the phone face down on the desk. Some things were better left unanswered. It was over. Helen sat at her desk, the soft glow of her office's ambient lighting casting long shadows over the city below. Her mind was sharp, her focus unbroken by the bustle of the day. Her business, her foundation, her influence, everything was thriving. She had cultivated it all from the ground up, and now it was blooming in ways she hadn't dared to imagine. She had just secured a partnership with an international conglomerate, one that would open doors to new markets across the globe. The excitement buzzed through her, but it was tempered by something else, something she hadn't fully acknowledged until now, her complete control over her future. The phone on her desk buzzed with a new notification. She glanced down at it, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Another media mention, another business victory. But there was no time to celebrate. She had a meeting with potential partners in a few hours. Her world was moving forward, and she was at the center of it. She thought back to the speech she had given at the conference just days ago. The crowd had been so receptive, so inspired. Helen had shared her story, her journey from struggle to triumph, and it had resonated with so many women in the audience. She had used her platform to speak about issues that mattered to her: women's rights, the importance of supporting one another, and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. Those messages had earned her respect, admiration, and more doors opening in her path. And yet, as she sat there, her reflection in the glass looking out at the city, there was still something lingering in her chest, something unresolved. Megan. Her daughter's name had not been absent from her thoughts these last few months. Every now and then, a fleeting memory would rise to the surface, and Helen would feel the sting of it, a sharp reminder of what had been lost. But just as quickly, she would push it aside, focusing on the future. There was no room for hesitation, no time for regret. Megan had made her choice, and so had she. Yet despite everything, despite the emotional distance, Megan had reached out once more. Helen had received a message from her just that morning. It was short, but the words were unmistakable. "I've lost everything. I'm sorry. I'm asking you to forgive me." The message sat there on her phone, an unfinished chapter in a book Helen had long closed. For a brief moment, Helen allowed herself to consider it, to imagine a world where Megan's plea wasn't a simple echo of defeat, but perhaps something more. Maybe this was the moment when a mother and daughter could reconcile, when bridges could be mended. But just as quickly, she reminded herself that the decision had already been made. She had chosen this path for herself, and it was the one that would carry her forward. As she finished reading the message, her mind flickered back to the countless hours spent building everything she had now: the empire, the foundation, the life of purpose she had created after so much sacrifice. Megan had once been part of that vision, but she had walked away from it. And Helen had no intention of looking back. The world was moving fast. She had opportunities waiting for her, opportunities to travel, to speak, to build bridges with global leaders. She'd already started planning her next adventure, a trip to Asia, where she would meet with partners to expand her influence even further. The horizon was vast, and Helen was ready to claim her place in it. She stood, walking to the window, her fingers tracing the cool glass as she looked down at the world below. The city was alive with possibility, just like her. She had control now, complete control over her future. The silence in her office was broken by the familiar sound of a notification. Megan's message still lingered, an open wound in the otherwise perfect calm of Helen's life. But Helen didn't reach for her phone. She had made her choice, and no matter how much the past tugged at her, she wasn't going to let it define her future. The road ahead was hers to walk, and no one, not even Megan, could take that away from her. Helen stood in the grand conference room of her new venture's headquarters, overlooking the city skyline. The room was filled with young professionals, eager faces, all drawn to the success she had built. The new partnership she had secured was nothing short of a triumph, expanding her influence globally and opening doors to untapped markets in Asia, Europe, and beyond. The deal she'd just signed was a game changer, an opportunity to establish her legacy on a worldwide stage. She could feel the weight of the moment, but it didn't overwhelm her. Instead, it was energizing. This was the next step, the culmination of all the years of hard work, sacrifice, and yes, pain. The empire she had built was now truly global. and her name had become synonymous with not just business success, but with breaking barriers for women in a male-dominated world. Helen had already started to shift her focus toward mentoring the next generation of female leaders. She had always believed in giving back, in providing a ladder for others to climb. Her foundation's work had expanded, supporting young women who were eager to learn the ropes of business. She had become a beacon for those who once felt they didn't belong in the corporate world, a living testament to the power of resilience. She stood before the small group of mentees one evening, speaking with quiet authority as they hung on every word. "Don't wait for someone to give you permission," she told them. "Your success is yours to create. But you have to be willing to sacrifice, to stand firm, and to make hard choices." The women in the room nodded, inspired by her strength. For them, Helen was not just a mentor. She was proof that they too could break free from the constraints society often placed on them. She was proof that a woman could be both fierce and compassionate, strong and vulnerable, successful and human. Meanwhile, Megan's life had spiraled further. Despite her attempts to restart her career, the weight of her decisions had caught up with her. The media that once heralded her as a rising star had now largely forgotten her. The businesses she had tried to build lacked the vision and direction she needed, and nothing seemed to stick. Her new family, what she had once believed would replace Helen, had its own struggles, and Megan found herself grappling with the emptiness of the life she had chosen. Helen couldn't help but feel a distant sorrow for Megan, but it was not her burden to carry anymore. The life Megan had wanted to walk away from was no longer her concern. Helen had moved on, focused on what truly mattered now: the work, the women she mentored, and the global impact she was making. Her phone buzzed on her desk, breaking her thoughts. Another message from Megan, this one longer, pleading for a chance to reconnect, to rebuild. The same familiar apology, the same echoes of regret. But Helen didn't reach for her phone. The decision had been made. The door had closed, and as much as she once thought it would be impossible to move forward without the connection to her daughter, she had realized something fundamental. She was enough. Her legacy, her vision, would not be defined by what she had lost, but by what she had created. David, ever the silent supporter, had grown into a more active role within the business. He had been by her side since the beginning, but now he was taking on more responsibilities. She had seen his growth, his understanding of the work that had once seemed too distant for him. They were partners now, fully aligned, pushing forward together. Their relationship had evolved, from mother and son to true allies in this business venture. Helen leaned back in her chair, taking in the view of the world outside. She'd made her mark, not just on her industry, but on the world itself. She had built something that could never be taken from her, something that would last long after she was gone. The journey had been long and hard, filled with moments of doubt, loss, and sacrifice. But as she looked out over the city, she knew that she had made the right choice. She had embraced the road ahead, a road that was hers to navigate. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, a new chapter began, one filled with promise, possibility, and the unshakable belief that her best work was yet to come. Helen leaned back in her office chair, the weight of the city skyline before her, both humbling and empowering. The empire she had built was thriving. Global partnerships were flourishing. Her influence was expanding, and her foundation was helping countless women rise to leadership positions. It was the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and at times, painful decisions. But the victory was hers, and it was real. She'd become the embodiment of resilience, a role model for women who wanted to take control of their lives and their futures. Helen had embraced the freedom that came with standing alone, making her own choices, and building something that could never be taken away from her. It was a freedom she had earned through every hardship, every loss, and every sacrifice. Her business continued to grow, and as her reach extended across continents, so did her ability to empower others. She had created spaces where women could thrive. businesses that helped others build their own success. Her mentorship programs had flourished, and her speeches at global conferences inspired the next generation of leaders. Helen's life had become more than just about profit. It was about creating lasting change. She had woven her success into something that gave back. But as the months passed, Megan's name had become a distant echo. Despite her attempts to rebuild her life, Megan had faded from the spotlight. The businesses she had tried to launch collapsed, and the relationships she had counted on were unraveling. The world had moved on, and Megan, despite her pleas for forgiveness, was left behind. Helen couldn't change that. The bond between them had been broken, and there was no room for second chances. Helen didn't allow herself to dwell on it anymore. She had made her choice. It was the right one. The door had closed, and it had stayed closed. The peace that came with that decision was not without its cost, but it was the price of the freedom she now enjoyed. She was no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she had built. One evening, as she prepared for another international trip to further expand her empire, her phone buzzed with a new notification, another message from Megan. This one, like the others, was filled with regret, a plea for understanding. "I was wrong," it read. "I see that now. I just wish I could have made things right." Helen stared at the screen for a long moment. The pain of those words lingered, but she had made peace with it. Megan had chosen her path, and Helen had chosen hers. It was too late. The world was hers to explore. Opportunities beckoned, and Helen was determined to take them all. She had earned this life, this control over her future. There was no going back now. The road ahead was hers to walk, and she was ready to take the next step. Helen sat by the large window of her penthouse apartment, a mug of tea warming her hands. The city stretched out before her, alive with possibility, but the noise and chaos of it all felt distant now. She had built something from nothing, an empire, a legacy, a life, and for the first time in years, the weight of it all felt lighter. There were no more decisions to make that could tear at her heart. She had found peace in the choices she had made, in the life she had created. As her foundation continued to thrive, so did her personal sense of accomplishment. The global expansion of her business had been nothing short of extraordinary, and she had worked tirelessly to ensure that her message, her vision, was heard in every corner of the world. But it wasn't just the financial successes that brought her fulfillment anymore. It was the people she mentored, the change she inspired. Her legacy wasn't just measured in assets. It was in the lives she had touched, in the paths she had paved for others to walk. She no longer woke up with the same heaviness that had once weighed on her heart. The grief of losing Megan had softened over time, replaced by a quiet understanding. Megan had made her choices, and Helen had made hers. There was no regret anymore, only the undeniable truth that both had walked away from something precious, and both would have to live with it. But just when she had finally allowed herself to feel the fullness of her independence, her phone buzzed. Another message from Megan. Helen stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the notification. It was the same as before, an apology, a plea for forgiveness. Megan's words were filled with sorrow, regret, and a desire to make amends. "I've changed," the message read. "I know what I lost, and I can't undo it, but I want to try. Please, can we talk?" For a moment, Helen let herself feel the weight of the words. Her heart tugged, but it was a fleeting sensation. She had made peace with everything. Megan had been part of her life, but that was no longer her reality. The life she had now, the independence, the freedom, was hers, and no one could take it away from her. She set the phone down without responding. The message lingered on the screen, but it was already fading into the past. Megan's path, no matter how painful, had led them to this place of silence, and Helen had long accepted that silence as the boundary between the past and the future. The world around her was changing, growing, and Helen was at the center of it all. But she had learned, over the years, to lean into her solitude, to find fulfillment in the small victories, the quiet moments of reflection. The world was full of noise, but Helen had created a space for herself where that noise no longer mattered. She surrounded herself with people who believed in her vision, who understood the importance of what she had built, and who respected the journey that had brought her to where she was. Her friends and colleagues had become her support system. They were the ones who knew her struggles, her sacrifices, and stood beside her with unwavering belief in the work she did. She no longer felt the need to prove herself to anyone. Helen glanced at the clock. Another meeting, another opportunity to expand her reach. But this time, she didn't feel the pressure. She felt gratitude for the choices she had made, for the life she had crafted. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, there was a calm certainty in her movements. She had created something that couldn't be taken from her, a legacy of strength, independence, and the power to shape her own destiny. And that was enough. As the door closed behind her, Helen looked out at the city one last time before stepping into her car. She had arrived at a place where her peace was unshakable. She was exactly where she was meant to be, and there was nothing left to fear. Helen stood at the edge of the balcony, the cool evening breeze brushing against her face as she looked out at the city below. The skyline, once a symbol of the challenges she had faced, now felt like a testament to everything she had built, the empire she had created, the legacy she had forged. It was all real, tangible, and thriving. Her business had expanded globally, and the recognition she had received for her work in both business and philanthropy was unparalleled. Helen had become a symbol of strength and independence, a leader who had shattered barriers for women in a male-dominated world. But more than the accolades, it was the work itself that brought her fulfillment. The women she mentored, the lives she changed, the communities she helped. Yet despite everything she had accomplished, there was a lingering sense of peace she had only recently found. She had finally reconciled with the choices she had made, the painful decisions that had come with them. The choice to disinherit Megan had not been easy, but it had been necessary. Helen had long accepted that their bond was irreparably broken. Megan had made her choices, and Helen had made hers. The phone on the table beside her buzzed, pulling Helen from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, another message from Megan. "I understand now," the message read. "I was wrong. I regret everything, but it's too late to fix it. I'm sorry." Helen stared at the screen for a long moment. A part of her felt the sting of those words, but she didn't reach for the phone. Megan had made her bed, and it was not Helen's responsibility to fix it. The silence between them had become permanent, and while part of her would always mourn the loss of their relationship, she knew that chapter was over. Helen had found her purpose beyond her family. Her foundation, her work in business, and her commitment to empowering women were enough. She had built something that no one could take from her, and that, more than anything, was a legacy she could be proud of. As the evening wore on, Helen reflected on how far she had come. There were times when the journey had seemed impossible, when the weight of her choices had threatened to break her. But she had endured, and now she was stronger for it. The road ahead was wide open, filled with more opportunities to grow, to mentor, to inspire. She had built a life on her terms, one that was fulfilling and meaningful. Her name, once just hers, was now synonymous with strength and success. She had created a future, not just for herself, but for others as well. Helen smiled to herself, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had made the right choices. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Helen sat in her favorite armchair, a cup of tea in her hand, gazing out at the sprawling city below. The view, one she had come to cherish over the years, now felt more like a reflection of the life she had built. The past few months had been filled with new opportunities, partnerships, investments, and global ventures that continued to shape her world. Her influence had spread further, and each new project, each new deal, was a confirmation that she had done the right thing. Her business had grown beyond her wildest dreams. It had evolved into a force that empowered others to reach their potential. particularly women who had once believed their dreams were unattainable. Helen had created a space for them to thrive, a platform where strength, resilience, and hard work were celebrated. It was more than just a business to her now. It was a movement, one that would echo through generations. Her foundation had expanded, with branches in multiple countries offering mentorship, education, and resources for women who needed it the most. She had become a mentor to so many, sharing her story not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to what was possible when you didn't give up on yourself. Helen's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, the name flashing back at her, Megan. It had been weeks since Megan's last message, but this time the words were different. "I've made so many mistakes. Can we talk? I need you." Helen's thumb hovered over the screen. The pain of their broken relationship, once so raw, had long since faded into something distant. She had come to terms with it. Megan had chosen her path, and Helen had chosen hers. Yet, there was something in that message that made her hesitate. For a brief moment, she thought of picking up the phone, of responding. But then she remembered the years of sacrifice, the moments of heartache that had led her to where she was. She had worked so hard to create this space, this peace, and she wasn't about to let anyone, not even her daughter, disrupt it. With a steady breath, Helen placed the phone back down. The silence between them was the final chapter. She had made peace with it, and there was no going back now. The quiet hum of the city continued, its rhythm steady and unyielding, much like the life she had built. She had fought for every inch of it, and she was proud of who she had become. There were times in the past when she had doubted herself, when the weight of her choices had seemed almost too much to bear. But now, in the quiet of her home, she knew she had made the right decisions. Helen thought back to the early days, the long nights when she had worked tirelessly to get her business off the ground. She had been alone in those days, driven by a vision that no one else seemed to see. But with each success, each small victory, the doubts had lessened. The fear had faded. She had created something lasting, a legacy of strength and empowerment. Her name, once just hers, had become a symbol of perseverance, of a woman who had built her empire from the ground up. And now, as she looked around at the life she had crafted, she knew it wasn't just about business. It was about the difference she had made, the lives she had touched, the paths she had helped others carve for themselves. Her focus was no longer just on the present. She spent her time looking forward to what the future held. There were still so many opportunities, so many people to help, so many dreams to foster. And as she turned her attention to the next generation of leaders, her purpose became clearer than ever. Helen had found peace, not in the accomplishments she had achieved, but in the realization that she had done it on her terms. The road ahead was still open, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. As she turned to face the future, she knew that her legacy was no longer just a reflection of the past. It was a promise to the future, one that would endure for generations to come. Helen stood in the center of the grand ballroom, the sound of applause ringing in her ears as she accepted yet another award for her contributions to business and philanthropy. It was the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and endless determination. The recognition she had received from both national and international organizations was an acknowledgement of everything she had built, not just the empire, but the foundation she had created for women to rise, to lead, and to thrive. As the ceremony came to a close, Helen looked out at the sea of faces before her. She was no longer just a businesswoman. She had become a symbol, a beacon of strength for those who had been told they couldn't. The journey had been difficult, but the reward was beyond what she had ever imagined. But more than the trophies and titles, it was the lives she had touched that gave her the deepest satisfaction. The applause began to fade as she took a step back from the stage. her thoughts drifted to the people who had been with her from the very beginning, her loyal team, the women she mentored, the partners who believed in her vision. The empire she had built was no longer just about success. It was about creating lasting change, empowering others to create their own paths. But even as she stood in the glow of her triumph, she knew Megan's absence remained a silent presence in her life. The pain of losing her daughter, though dulled over time, was something Helen had never fully shaken. Megan had finally realized the depth of her mistakes, her letters, her apologies. They had been heartfelt, but the truth was it was too late. Helen had moved on. She couldn't look back anymore. Megan had chosen a different path, and that choice had cost them both. But Helen had found peace in her own journey. The life she had built, the legacy she had created, was hers alone to carry. No one could diminish that. Not Megan, not anyone. Helen walked outside into the cool night air, her footsteps echoing through the quiet courtyard of the event hall. As the city lights flickered in the distance, she reflected on how far she had come. From a young woman with nothing but a vision to the woman standing before the world as a living example of resilience, leadership, and strength. She had done everything on her terms. She thought about the future, about the next generation of women who would take up the mantle she had passed on. They were the ones who would carry her legacy forward, and that gave her a sense of peace she had never known before. Her work wasn't finished, but it had already surpassed what she had once imagined. The sound of a car approaching pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see the driver waiting to take her back to her home, the same home that had become both a sanctuary and a symbol of her independence. As she slid into the back seat, the driver started the engine. Helen leaned back, feeling the steady rhythm of the car beneath her. She'd worked so hard to get here. She had built everything on her own, and now she was content knowing that no one could ever take that from her. But just as the car turned onto her street, her phone buzzed with a familiar notification. It was another message from Megan. It had been the same message, over and over. Regret, apology, a plea for reconciliation. Helen glanced at the screen but didn't reach for the phone. When the car stopped in front of her home, she stepped out into the cool air. Her eyes scanned the street. There, across the way, she saw it. Megan's old house now sold, the for sale sign still hanging on the lawn. Helen smiled to herself. When my daughter told the real estate agent I'd be out soon, she thought, I bought the house next door and showed her that I'm just getting started. She had built her life, not just for herself, but for the generations to come. The future was hers to shape.